I try and temper creativity with being very deliberate. And so I watched a lot of filmmaking friends before me go to Sundance, get a similar call, and not have the next project.
Pete, I understand the first movie that you wrote and directed got into Sundance?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess it's the first one that I put out to film festivals. It's a short film I did called 3D. It was my senior thesis film coming out of NYU Film School. So it's kind of like, you know, if you were an undergraduate film and you were like crazy enough to say, I'm a director, like this was the path. And so did a 24-minute short film that I wrote, produced, directed. Had to raise $24,000 to make this film. It was a different time because we had to shoot on film. So everything was, I mean, people who have never shot on film have no, have no budgetary appreciation for what that meant. And the example I often use is that we had to do an answer print. So, you know, like when you used to develop film photographs, you'd develop and then you get the negative back in the little pouch with the photos, right? And you could continue to develop that negative again and again if you needed to. And so that's how we were making films. We had the negative, but we had a work print. And so we would cut the work print, but save the negative. And then when the work print was finished, we'd cut, well, not us, there'd be a negative cutter with white gloves and glue who would cut the actual negative that ran through the camera and then cement it back together to match the locked picture from the work print. And then that cemented negative that had run through the camera, all the film that had run through the camera now cemented together in the, you know, configuration of the film. That's the print from which that's the film from which the prints get made. And so anyhow, that cost $4,000 for the negative cut. And now I've made shorts for that amount of money, you know? And so anyhow, that film starred Dorian Missick, who was an actor I met during my NYU days, and it's gone on to be in 4 or 5 of my projects. Starred Kerry Washington right at the beginning of her career, fresh out of George Washington. She was graduating the same year I did. Al Thompson, myself, and it went to Sundance and about 30 festivals around the world.
And so did you actually think that you could get into Sundance? I mean, were you thinking it's a wild card?
Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the thing. I think over time, it's nice to know, for me, it was nice to know that there were these potential outlets for a project, but I never did the projects for those outlets. So it was always enough for me to finish something. That was kind of the point. Now, that's not removing the reality that I am aware that these outlets exist, but it's like this kind of filmmaker Zen balancing act of like, if I put all my weight on acknowledgement from some outside group, then if I don't get that, well, what is that going to do for me emotionally on this end? You know, will I feel like I failed? Will I feel frustrated? Will I become embittered? You know, so I didn't expect it. I knew it could happen. And when it did happen, I felt like I had achieved something that was pretty difficult. And so I was very happy about that. But that's been the journey of the whole career. Like, how do you navigate what you want from what's achievable and what can you guarantee about this work that you do, so you don't, you know, find yourself becoming one of those people who are just angry at how the industry has not recognized them for what they think is great work.
What was the submission fee at that time?
Oh
for
boy.
Sundance?
You know what? I have a pretty good memory. It was probably like $45, and it was probably like, 45 I didn't have, But that was always part of your budgeting too. Like, how much are we going to put aside for film festival submissions? But it was either $35 or $45. I'm pretty sure.
And so no Kickstarter, no Seed and Spark, no Indiegogo at that time.
No.
And how did you raise that? You said 24,000.
24,000. So I raised a portion from someone I had interned with. I raised a portion from my mom, a small portion. I raised a portion from just knocking on doors and, hey, remember you put those braces on me, Well, you look like you might have a little bit of, money. So it was kind of by hook or crook. I worked, and it took a long time to put it all together. The film kind of sat around for a while until post-production money could be raised.
Did you go to Sundance with the film?
I did, yeah.
You did? Okay. So when you packed up to leave Sundance, what was your mindset thinking like, okay, now things are really going to change for me?
Right. Yeah, I think, that's the thing, right? You kind of get into this place where you like almost everything I've said to you, I could then, shake the Etch-a-Sketch and erase it all, because you try and temper yourself with this, healthy view of expectations. And then you get into the thing and you're like, okay, maybe this is it now. And so, yeah, I think at that time I was definitely hopeful and expectant of certain things to come out of it, because I had watched other people have a particular kind of journey after going to Sundance.
And then you got back home, and so you're in New York City or New Jersey?
In New Jersey.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what happened?
So get back home, I get a phone call from Lynn Auerbach, who worked at the Sundance Institute. She was interested in seeing if I had a feature or anything, like what was my next project. Luckily, I did. And so I passed that feature script on to her. I had been very strategic because I try and temper creativity with being very deliberate. And so I watched a lot of filmmaking friends before me go to Sundance, get a similar call, and not have the next project. And, they say, oh, we'll reach out when, you finish that script. But like, if you take 8 months to reach out, well, the likelihood that they've reached out to a new batch of people who had a, great film at another film festival is high. And I think you just want to, when that doorbell rings, you want to answer the door, as far as I'm concerned. And so I got her that script. It wasn't really, ready or perfect in any way, but it had fade in and fade out and about 113 pages in between. And so she read it. She was like, well, I don't think this is gonna be the one, but get me another draft. And that was all I needed. So we did that dance for maybe a year and a half before they were like, well, look, we're not going to select the film, but we'll introduce you to a bunch of producers in LA and set you up with meetings. And so that was kind of the evolution of that.
What did that experience teach you?
So the experience of going to Sundance and then coming home and then the phone not ringing, like off the hook. Well, in the book, I talk about after that screening at NYU's Film Festival, and again, taking a lot of that expectation of certain acknowledgement that I had at Sundance and bringing it back home to the university. We had a film festival that was designed to screen all the work of all the students that finished the project. And so they would have a craft award, and they would have like a Wasserman finalist, so top 3 undergrad films, top 3 grad films. And the film didn't get recognized in any way whatsoever in any of the categories. And it had been advertised though as, a film to see, or look at how well our slate of films is doing. Here are these 6 films from this year that went to Sundance, including, 3D, et cetera, et cetera. And so after the awards kind of came and went, I had a meeting with the dean at the time, or the chair rather. And I was like, well, look, how does this happen? It's kind of crazy to me. This is righteous, indignant me at 22 years old. It's kind of crazy to me that you're using the film to promote the festival and how well, the work is in the festival, but then with these awards, it's like crickets or whatever. And he explained to me that, well, in the past, we've had a film win Sundance and come back and not be acknowledged in the way we're talking about. So I was like, all right, touche. I didn't win, I get it. And my takeaway from all of that was I can either be upset about this, which it's clearly becoming evident that I'd be standing on very unfirm ground with this anger. What I'm taking away from this is that I never took the opportunity to build a network of people who were aware of me, as, a student to watch, or someone that they had a more personal relationship with. And so coming out of that, both Sundance and then the NYU Film Festival, I was pretty committed to never having that happen again. And so building a community of folks who would be aware of me and know my story and be clear on where I wanted to go with my career. And that's how I, built my production company, rinse, repeat. I think that's how I got into television directing, which was not just like I decided to do it and it happened. It was very deliberate and took a lot of time and a lot of relationship building. And so much like the phone call job, there was this great takeaway from those 2 film festival experiences that I think I'm not where I am today had I not gone through them.
And so did you actually go on meetings? Did you fly out to LA?
Oh yeah.
During that time you did?
I went out to NYU. I went out to LA in June of 2002. And I had, maybe 15 meetings set. And, I stumbled my way through these meetings. I did the best I could. Looking back, I probably was full of passion, but maybe didn't know how to run a good meeting, present myself in like meeting form. And, the takeaway from the trip was, well, it looks like the film is maybe a little too mainstream for what the Sundance Institute was looking to do. And then on the flip, it looks like it's a little too indie for what these more mainstream producers at the time in 2002 are looking to do. And let's just pause and say it's a vastly different landscape for content in 2002. It's like you had movies made at studios or mini majors, and then you had like 2 or 3 indies that fought through and made it out. It was not this kind of world where you see all these independent films and you could put them out on whatever platform you want, or you could make them for cheap enough that, you could self-distribute them through your website or something. And so, I brought that back and said, well, if it's not gonna work for either of these 2 demographics or buckets or whatever we want to call, then looks like I'm gonna have to raise some money on my own. And that became my focus after that trip.
And so not indie enough for Sundance. Mm-hmm. How does that happen?
Well, I think it changes with the times, like I think every festival slate, if you look at any festival year to year, there's kind of a theme that happens, just that kind of reflects the times. And I think in 2002, the premise and the execution of the film was not necessarily like leaning toward the types of character exploration that might have been more of the day, as far as like, this is what an indie film is going to do. And all of these things are like shifting terms, you know? So that's another thing for like filmmakers to always remember. Like, these things can shift, they and blow in the wind. They change with the times. I mean, I've done TV shows where one year they say, we will never hire a first-time director, you know, when I was trying to get my first jobs. And then 2 seasons later, people I know are getting their first ever episode of TV on the same show. And, you know, things are free to change, but it's like, just knowing, like, it's all so malleable. It's all so, you know, nothing is set in stone.
So do you think that if you had been the same age then, now, and gotten into Sundance, that it would be more difficult? Because you talked about building a network. Well, there was no social media back then. Yeah, no MySpace even yet.
Right.
So
yeah, it was nothing.
Right.
Email was your social network.
Right. AOL. Yeah, you've got mail.
Right.
So do you think it would be more difficult, or do you think it was actually easier then because there were less people trying to do it?
That's a great question. Do I think it was easier then? You know, I would say it was not easier then. While it may have been more difficult it definitely was more difficult to make something. And now that means there are probably fewer things being made. But conversely, I think because the barriers to entry are lower now, and it's kind of there's been a democratization to like getting in the game. You've got fewer things being made in the past with poor execution. And then you've got more things being made now, but with people who have the opportunity to execute well, because it's not like their first thing ever. You know what I mean? And I remember when I saw like friends' brothers, like from my year of high school, like one friend's brother, I'm thinking specifically, was like in middle school and was doing like green screen stuff. You know what I mean? It's like, I hadn't even done it yet. I was like 24, I had never green screened anything yet. And this kid's in middle school, green screen and stuff. So you take that and you just move along the timeline of like, now that person's 22 with a short film, that the possibility for that short film to be so much more well executed than what I was making, I think is high.